Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Nightmares Nightly. Hey, David. Long time, I know. Let's fix that. Remember that treehouse we used to hang out back in the day? Let's meet up there, have a few drinks or something. Write me back if you're down. Your good friend, Sean. I could hardly believe the email in front of me. I couldn't believe that Sean Paul had contacted me. We were inseparable back in elementary to junior high, drifted apart in high school, hadn't spoken since the first year of college. That was nearly 6 years ago. At the risk of sounding like an ass, this was certainly out of the blue. But we were really good friends, and I'd always felt guilty about not keeping in touch. With that in mind, I decided to write him back. It wouldn't hurt to see how he was doing, after all. Hell, maybe we'd be able to rekindle that old friendship. Ever since starting full-time employment, my life's gotten kind of dry, so it might be a nice change. Hey, Sean. Crazy hearing from you after all this time. Sure, let's meet up. I'm free this weekend. David. It felt weird signing my name off at the end there, almost like I was emailing my boss or something. I thought back to our times in the treehouse for the next few days. I couldn't help but smile. Those experiences were the innocence of youth personified. I remember reading manga, watching movies on his iPod Touch, and the one time we snuck up a few of my brother's beers just to see what they would taste like. Not so innocent, I guess. The weekend finally got here, and I drove out to the local forest. When I moved out, I didn't go very far. It was about a 15-minute drive there from my apartment. We'd agreed to meet at 5 p.m., so I arrived at 4:30. On the way there, I began to wonder, what were the chances that our treehouse would still be there? I mean, it was over a decade ago since we'd last gone up. Nevertheless, it wasn't a huge issue. I was sure we'd be able to just sit by the river and drink if it had been torn down or something. Still, I was curious to see what it might look like after all these years. I still remembered exactly where it was. There are just some things you don't forget. By the river, just right of the clearing. It wasn't a big forest. My eyes lit up with nostalgia as I saw it. I suppose it looked exactly like I remembered it. A bit worse for wear, but still intact. I put down my 6-pack of beer at the trunk of the tree. I recalled the makeshift door that we'd built. At the time, we thought it was some marvel of engineering for kids our age. It was a legitimate, functioning door, similar to one that would lead into an attic. I grinned as I began climbing the wooden slabs that we'd hammered into the tree all those years ago. It was our attempt at creating a ladder, and it honestly worked well enough. I was brimming with excitement as I reached the entrance. With a big smile on my face, I reached up and tried pushing the door open. But nothing happened. I mean, my hand just hit a wall of unmoving wood. I looked up, and what I saw confused me to no end. Instead of the actual door that we'd made, one just seemed to be crudely drawn on with a marker. I stood there for a second, wondering what the hell was going on. I mean, was this the wrong treehouse? I looked around the forest again. Not a chance. Like I said, there's just some things that you don't forget. I continued inspecting the space where the door should have been. It wasn't as if somebody had taped or glued it shut. It was clean, unbroken wood. I climbed back down and looked at the treehouse from the ground. Still the same way I remembered it. A little banged up after all these years, but still unmistakable. Vaguely cube-shaped, brown wood, 2 small windows on either side, but no door. Somehow, there was no door. It bothered me so much that I began searching the surrounding area. Maybe, somehow, this was the wrong treehouse, despite it looking the same and being in the same exact vicinity. I searched for about 25 minutes without finding anything before calling it quits. I walked back to the treehouse and looked up at it again. It was a puzzling situation, to say the least. I looked at my phone, seeing that it was now 5 p.m. Sean should have been arriving soon. At least I'd have somebody to share my confusion with. As I waited for him to get here, I wondered why somebody would build a treehouse that you couldn't enter. Hell, How did they carve out the window in the first place? My eyes began wandering around the forest and eventually back up to the treehouse, and then I froze in place. Somebody was staring at me through the window. They seemed to be standing a few feet back, so it was almost like looking at a shadow. I couldn't make out any facial features at all, but one thing was for sure. It sure as hell wasn't a kid. The broad shoulders gave that away. I stared at this mystery person for about a minute before they stepped back and out of view. The hairs on my arms stood up as I began backing up myself. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel right at all. Soon enough, I was in an all-out sprint. I got back to my car and noticed it was the only one in the lot. I took out my phone and texted Sean, telling him that I couldn't make it and for him not to come himself. I waited around 30 minutes for a response before finally driving off. I kept looking back at the forest the whole time, looking for that person in the treehouse. I got home a few hours ago. Sean hasn't responded yet, which worries me. Maybe he got there even before I did. Even stranger, I remember feeling a vague sense of familiarity when that person looked down at me, almost like I'd seen them before, which was impossible because I literally have no memories of anybody like that. I didn't even get a good look at their face. Sean texted me later that night. My hands shook as I opened my phone to read it, and I wasn't sure why. I mean, if I was getting a text from him, that meant he was safe, right? This is the message he sent me. Did you see him? I must have looked at the message for 20 straight minutes. Did I see him? I sure as hell did, but I decided to play dumb for the time being, just to see how Sean would react. Did I see who? I certainly didn't see you there. In any case, his next message caught me off guard. You know what I'm talking about. I want you to answer me seriously. I waited a bit before responding. This was getting interesting, but not in a good way. This is how the rest of our conversation went. Who is he? So you did see him? Okay, sure, I did. So who the hell is he? You still don't remember? That's what I was expecting. Remember what? What the hell is going on? Are you going to believe what I have to say? Depends on what you're going to say. Meet me in the forest parking lot tomorrow at 6 p.m. I know that you don't remember, but I'll help you do so. This isn't something we can run away from. That entire conversation had only created more questions than it answered. I mean, what the hell was I not remembering? And why was Sean acting so weird? And, most importantly, who the hell was the guy in our treehouse? Sean used to be my best friend, sure, but I wasn't just gonna trust him like this. I decided to call June, a mutual friend of ours, in order to dig up some information. Unlike Sean, I actually kept in contact with her. Here's how that conversation went. David, what's up? June, do you remember Sean from junior high? She went silent for a few moments. David, what? This better not be some kind of sick joke. Joke? How would it be a joke? Listen, I just want to know if you've talked to him lately. If you know what he's been up to. Did you see him? Yeah, I did. And he was acting real weird. David, you can't go back. Go back where? I thought June would act as a voice of sanity here, but that clearly wasn't going to happen. The only explanation that made sense to me was that this was all just one elaborate prank that they were both in on. Ridiculous, I know, but so are the circumstances. In the middle of our call, I got another text from Sean. Don't tell anybody about this, especially June. Please, don't get her involved. I was starting to get fed up with this whole mystery bullshit. I was ready to give Sean a piece of my mind. I was going to ask, no, demand, that he tell me exactly what was going on and what he wanted from me. But something caught my eye before I could send the message. Somebody was standing in my backyard. My heart nearly dropped when I saw it. My porch light was on, but they were standing in the farthest corner, so I could hardly make out any explicit details. It seemed to be a tall man with broad shoulders, but that was about all I could discern. I looked down at my phone and dialed 911, but when I looked up, the person had disappeared. Or so I thought. I turned my head slightly and realized they were actually standing on my porch. I couldn't stop myself from screaming this time. Now fully illuminated, I could see that this person was wearing a black tracksuit and one of those white plastic theater masks with a grinning mouth. It was almost too small for his face. The sudden sight of him petrified me to the point where I couldn't move a muscle for the longest time. Eventually, the man lurched forward and smashed his head into my glass door, cracking his mask in the process. And then he did it again, and again, and after the fourth time, it shattered. That's when I started running. I could hear his heavy footsteps reverberating through my empty house as I barreled out my front door. I wasn't quite sure where to go, so I just ran into a nearby convenience store before dialing the police. My hands shook as I told them what had happened, and they said that they'd send somebody right over. After calming myself down, I decided to call Sean as well. Obviously, I was still pissed at him, but I needed answers, and I needed them soon. He picked up after the first ring. "Sean, can you guess what the hell just happened to me?"
What?
"Some asshole just broke into my house."
Was he wearing a mask?
What? Yeah. How the hell did you know?
Did you call the police?
Obviously, no shit. I could hear him sigh over the phone, which pissed me off even more. "Look, you want to stop playing this weird game with me? I haven't seen you in forever, and then you come back into my life with this kind of bullshit?" He chuckled.
They really did us dirty, didn't they?
"Say one more line of cryptic nonsense, and I'll report you to the police myself."
You can't go back to your house now. They'll be waiting for you. And don't ask me who they are. I'll tell you in person. Remember that diner we'd go to during our first year of college? It's been open for a few weeks now. Meet me there ASAP.
"Why there?"
"'Cause I need a beer and coffee. Also, I think they've figured out where I'm living as well. In the meantime, don't trust the cops."
He hung up afterwards. I stood there for the longest time, trying not to let the disbelief wash over me. About a minute later, I got another call. This time, it was the police.
"Hello, sir. We've taken care of him. For now, we need you to come back to your house and answer some questions. Come back."
I told them that I'd be on my way, which was really the only response that I could give them. I thought about Sean's warning. If I trusted him, and he really had gone psycho over the years, then I was in big trouble. But, at the same time, there was something in the police officer's tone that I didn't quite like. Sean sounded more genuine. After another few minutes of consideration, I decided to go to the diner. At least it was a public place. He wouldn't kill me there, right? I left the store and began making my way over. I had been standing in the chip aisle for a while, and the cashier looked about ready to call the cops himself. Since I left my car back at the house, I was forced to take public transit, which I really didn't want to do. Now I had the virus to worry about on top of everything else. The bus was empty when I got on, so I decided to close my eyes for a moment. It had been a long day, and I thought I deserved some rest. When I opened them back up a few stops later, 4 more people had gotten on. They were all wearing those theater masks, all of which had varying expressions, and they were staring right at me. Now, I don't know what you would have done in a scenario like this, but I kinda just froze. I'm not sure how long it lasted. Could have been a minute, maybe 10. At one point, the bus stopped moving, and I could see the driver putting on his own mask. Not an ideal situation, to say the least. After working up the courage, I decided to make a break for it. I bolted up and dashed down the aisle, not really sure what I was expecting there. What, that nobody was going to try and stop me? One of the masked individuals that had gotten on was a large, burly man. He grabbed me by the shoulder and pulled me back before I could escape the bus. His fingers dug deep into my flesh as he centered me towards him. "Are you going to come back?" he asked in a disturbing, monotonous tone. I didn't answer. Instead, I shrugged away from his grip and ran off. He definitely let it happen. If he'd actually been trying to keep me in place, there's no way I would have budged. Thankfully, nobody followed me off. Instead, they just sat there, watching me as the bus drove away. Things had gone from annoying to downright horrifying. I didn't get it. What the hell did they want from me? It clearly wasn't money. They would have just held me there. My mind kept going back to the idea that this was all a prank. As absurd as that was, it still made the most sense. If that was the case, then I was beyond pissed at Sean. This was not something that I needed right now. I decided to walk to the diner. Thankfully, I wasn't accosted by any more people in masks on the way. I expected to enter the place and find a full camera crew waiting for me, and I was ready to chew them all out. But that wasn't the case. Instead, I found Sean sitting at a table alone. Oh, great, I thought. I guess the grand reveal will come later. I stormed over to his table and sat down, nearly fuming. What the hell is going on, man? He looked up at me and smiled, a face I hadn't seen in some time. I don't know if it was just me, but it looked as if he'd aged about 20 years. Nice to see you too, David. Been a while. You know, a normal friend would just stop by for drinks or something, but I guess I shouldn't have expected that from you, you damn psycho. I stopped myself from saying anything more. Look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. Sean chuckled. Come on, David. We never do this soppy bullshit. If I were you, I would have thought I jumped off the deep end as well. Before I go any further, I need to tell you about the last time I actually saw Sean. It wasn't exactly our best interaction. We were sitting here, in the same diner, and I stormed out on him after calling him all kinds of crazy and other related synonyms. But I had a reason to do so. He'd been weird ever since high school had begun. He started talking to me less and less, and it peaked during the last few weeks of grade 11, where we never even exchanged a word. Then, he spent the entire 12th grade being homeschooled. I mean, I had no idea what the hell was going on with him. Whenever I'd go over to his house, his parents would just smile at me and say he was busy. All the damn time. I always thought that they looked nervous when they said it as well. There was also a rumor floating around. Something about the cops finding him in the woods. I'm fuzzy on the details. I mean, it's not like him or his parents would ever talk about it. In the summer before college started, they just moved away entirely. I don't know where to. I thought that was going to be the last I'd ever seen of him. Clearly, I was wrong. Out of the blue one day, he called me over to the diner. I'd just finished my first semester of college on a high note, so I was feeling pretty good. It was made even better by the fact that my old friend had finally reached out to me. I was excited to know what had been going on with my best friend all these years. I wanted to know that things would be all right, and that everything would revert back to being normal with him, just like the old days. I wanted an explanation, but I didn't like the one that I got. It was like the plot of some bad horror movie. I don't remember what he said verbatim, but there was something about a cult that both him and I had apparently encountered in the woods one day. He tried so hard to convince me that it was all true, but I wasn't having it. Eventually, I just stormed out. I mean, I don't recall anything like that ever happening. Even now, it doesn't ring a bell. But I will admit, things are starting to get pretty weird. Do you believe me now? He asked. About what? I responded, knowing exactly about what. The cult, he said. The followers of the masked god. I scoffed. Oh, come on, Sean. This shit again? I understand why you thought I was crazy before, but come on, you're still denying it now? After everything you've seen? So you wanted me to see that guy in our treehouse. What is he, an actor? Just like the rest of these masked assholes? Sean sighed. And you think I'm the delusional one? I wanted to slam the table when he said that, but I calmed myself down. Okay, I said. Sure, it's weird. All of it is. But there's gotta be a better explanation than a damn cult. He just gave me a look of disbelief. Good grief, Dave, it sounds like you're in denial here. Why do you think I'm here? And where do you think I've been? I paused. It was a good question, one that I somehow hadn't bothered to ask. I don't know, I said. What are you doing here? I came back to save your ass. Like I said, this isn't something we can run away from. What do you... Let me explain, all right? Do you remember the last time we actually went up into that treehouse? I began opening my mouth, but quickly realized that the words weren't there. My mind was blank. I began recalling my childhood. All the time that I spent with Sean, it was fairly clear up until the summer before high school. I remembered what happened at the beginning. Meeting my ex-girlfriend Lindsay for the first time, watching The Dark Knight in theaters, the camping trip where we both got drunk and our parents kicked our asses. But that was all in July. I couldn't remember anything past that. What the hell had happened in August? Sean grinned at my likely confused expression. It's weird, isn't it? He said. The fact that you can't remember anything that happened that summer. Is it though? It's not like I remember everything that's ever happened to me. That's true, he continued. Maybe that summer was so insignificant that nothing worth remembering happened at all. He paused, looking me straight in the eye. But you know that's not true. I wasn't really liking where this conversation was headed. So what happened? I finally responded. And let me guess, it has something to do with this masked cult. He sighed, almost sounding relieved. Glad we're finally getting on the same page. What do you think? I'm not sure what to think at this point. I could see his eyes wander over to something behind me. Well, make up your mind later. Looks like they've gotten more widespread since the last time I was here. I turned around, seeing that the waitress was standing absolutely still, just a few feet away, holding an empty tray. And, of course, she was wearing a mask. The idea of the whole thing being a prank was becoming less and less likely. I should have moved out of this damn town. Yeah, probably, Sean said, nodding. Looks like I'm not getting my coffee here either. He unzipped his jacket, revealing a pistol on his belt. Are you serious right now? I said upon seeing it. Kind of an unexpected sight. Of course I'm serious, he said. This nightmare has been going on for far too long. It's time to end it. I could feel myself starting to sweat. Calling it an uncomfortable situation would have been selling it short. Please don't tell me you're planning on shooting that waitress. Waitress? He chuckled. That's not a waitress. Well, whoever she is, please don't do something dumb. Relax, he said, zipping his jacket back up. I'm just trying to give you peace of mind. Don't you have a gun as well? Of course I don't. Do I need one? More than you know. Oh my gosh, I said, burying my face into my hands. There's a lot of heat in here, Sean continued. I turned back around, seeing that at least 5 more of the restaurant patrons now had a mask on and were staring at us. Man, this is screwed up. Sean stood up and threw a crumpled $20 bill onto the table. Let's get out of here. And go where? Take a guess. What? How the hell am I supposed to know? Instead of answering the question, he just walked off. We left the building and headed back onto the streets. I don't know if it was just me, but I could feel a tension rising in the air, almost like an invisible pressure on my body. So, let's say that this cult hypothetically exists. What's it got to do with us? And why don't I remember any of it? I asked. Sean smiled. You should have asked that question at the beginning. I rolled my eyes. Anyways, it's a bit complicated. I figured. And I'm not sure if I remember everything myself, but let me start from where I think the beginning is. According to Sean, this is allegedly what had happened. You see, we'd stopped using the treehouse much during the latter years of junior high. I don't know, I guess we thought it was lame at that age. Nevertheless, we decided to go there one day, after months of not being there at all. This was in the August of 2008, the point where I stopped remembering anything. That day we went up there, we found a mask lying in the corner, one of those plastic theater masks. Sean said that he remembered his expression being a disturbing one, so much so that he found it hard to look at. He couldn't fathom why somebody would produce such a thing. "And guess what you went and did with that mask?" he asked. "What?" "You put it on and tried to scare me, like a real asshole." I could believe it. I was a bit of a rascal back then, but what he told me next was a bit less believable. As soon as I put it on, I apparently stopped moving. He thought it was all part of my act at first, but I never dropped it. I just stood absolutely still, not saying a single word. Even as he tried shaking me out of my sudden trance, I wouldn't budge. Eventually, he decided to get help, but before he went and climbed down the steps, he looked out the window and saw somebody was staring up at the treehouse from the ground. A person wearing a mask, standing at the edge of the clearing. Stifling an instinctive scream, he crouched down and began observing. Soon enough, this person was joined by more. At one point, the masked people had formed an effective perimeter around the tree. This is when he started freaking out. He tried everything to get me to stir, but I wouldn't budge. Eventually, he tried taking the mask off, but he couldn't. For some reason, it was stuck to my face like glue. We didn't have cell phones back then, so he couldn't just call somebody. He glanced back out the window, but couldn't see anybody there. He tilted his head down and figured out why. They'd all moved to the base of the tree. He backed away and grabbed the knife and baseball bat he'd hidden in the floorboards, his only line of defense. He could hear the people beginning to climb up. He dashed over and swung the bat at the head of the person who made it up first. To his horror, his swings didn't seem to yield any effect. He watched as the person's head violently rocked to the side upon impact, and he could hear something crack. But they didn't stop. They just kept pulling themselves up into the treehouse. In a last-ditch effort, he took out his knife and stabbed them in the shoulder. Instead of blood seeping out from the wound, there was some kind of sand-like substance. That had no effect either. Soon enough, 3 of the masked people had made it up. Sean dropped his weapons and backed himself into a corner. They stood still for a moment before turning their heads towards me, while I was still unmoving. One of them reached out and put a hand on my head before chanting out some inhuman dialect. This is when he supposedly passed out. "This all sounds like some kind of fever dream," I said, interrupting him. "I'm pretty sure I would have remembered something like that." "Let me finish the story," he responded. "Why? Does it get even more ridiculous?" "Let me guess. A spaceship landed next." He sighed, sounding more frustrated than before. "Oh man, you're in denial. I get it. Looks like I'll have to do something drastic to bring you back to reality." "Well, that doesn't sound very promising." He abruptly stopped in the middle of the street. He looked behind us, and I followed his gaze. 2 police officers were standing some distance behind us. They had also stopped in their tracks, staring intently at us. Sean took out his pistol and aimed it at them. "Dude, please don't." He fired a shot before I could finish my sentence, striking one of the officers straight in the chest. I put my hands up in horror. You've lost your mind," I said, starting to panic. "What the hell did you just do?" "Look at them," he said, nearly shouting. "Where's the blood?" Curious, I squinted. He was right. The shot had hit the officer close to point blank, but there was no blood stain. Instead, some kind of yellow-brown substance had started leaking from the wound. It almost looked like sand, but that wasn't even the most disturbing part. The cops didn't react at all. In fact, nobody did. The streets weren't packed by any means, but there were a good dozen people in the vicinity. None of them even glanced over at us. "Damn," Sean said, looking around. "It's gotten worse than I thought." Thanks for listening, everybody. And if you like what I'm doing and want to hear more, hit that subscribe button for more Nightmares Nightly.